Royal Commission has now resumed. Please be seated.
So, Ms Hogan-Doran, so that we're complete and we have full transparency and it's not confusing from what was happening technically before, I'll ask you to start from the top again, please, and go from there.
I understand the audio difficulties have been resolved.
Yes.
But hopefully by saying that I haven't jinxed it.
Fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No. Commissioners, we have all appreciated the level of engagement, cooperation and substantial contribution made by parties to the work of this Royal Commission. The materials that have been provided have been detailed and considered. You have seen from the material tendered this week the overwhelmingly positive response to your interim observations and our propositions. This is notwithstanding the short consultation period due to the exigencies of time. The Commission was mindful that a government may apprehend that a particular proposition could have unintended consequence. So each government was invited to propose any additional evidence in respect of a matter raised in their response to our propositions or arising out of another government's response, and to make written submissions in relation to any of the responses, propositions or your interim observations. In planning this final week of hearings, we have also allowed time should the governments of the states and territories and the Commonwealth wish to address you orally through their council. They have not felt the need to do so, and of course you have had the benefit of their views through their considered responses and the constructive commentary and submissions on the propositions we advanced. Commissioners, you well know that your task is to inquire into and make recommendations on our nation's natural disaster arrangements across all phases of resilience, mitigation, adaptation, preparedness, response and recovery. That task is large, and the evidence before you identified areas for improvement across the board. Some of that important work has already commenced, and that is to be commended. But there is much more work to be done. Your report will be vital in informing and shaping that necessary work. The existence of some 240 previous reports from various inquiries over the years speaks to the intractability of some of the problems you will consider. It also indicates, in some instances, an historic reluctance to comprehensively implement recommended solutions. Natural disaster risk is growing across Australia due to intensifying natural hazards with the warming global climate and increasing exposure and vulnerability of all Australians. We will face more frequent and intense natural disasters in the future. We must not shirk the interconnected causes and cascading effects of systemic disaster risk. Australia's national disaster arrangements were stretched in the 2019-2020 season. The status quo is no longer enough to defend us from the impacts of global warming and increasing challenges to the security of our nation. It is appropriate that your terms of reference are extensive and go to matters at the very heart of the Australian Federation. Efforts to improve by all stakeholders must be continuous. Stronger mitigation and adaptation measures are necessary. It is not enough just to improve our response. While stakeholders express to you a shared commitment to improvements, some continue to defend the status quo. The Australian public understandably expects action. All governments and stakeholders must choose to be an active and constructive part of the whole, rather than remain as disparate parts. The national natural disaster arrangements we deserve require unity, not just of commitment or purpose, but of action. Only then can we have confidence that our disaster arrangements are the best they can be. The time to act is now. If I may, I wish to say something about the life of this Royal Commission. This has been a Royal Commission like no other. You will recall, Commissioners, we first met with you here in Canberra back in March. But many of your council and solicitors soon scattered to their homes in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Queensland as the first of the pandemic restrictions took hold. We, as Council Assisting, are grateful for the support and instruction we have received throughout the Commission of Inquiry. Much of the preparation for our public hearings was supported by solicitors and policy officers working remotely from their homes, juggling pregnancy and new life, energetic toddlers, bored children, and stressed teenagers. Those of your counsel and solicitors who usually reside in Sydney and Melbourne and even Brisbane became road warriors, travelling up and down the Hume Highway. Eventually, though, to avoid the risk of infection and disruptions of quarantine, many of us have remained here in Canberra for weeks and indeed for some months on end, leaving behind spouses and relatives to bear the burdens of sustaining home and family life. I know my fellow counsel, Mr Tokley, Mr Glover, Ms Dovey, Ms Spees and Ms Ambakapathy, express their thanks for the support their spouses and young families have given them and thus enabled them to support you in the important work of this Commission. Just as you, Commissioners, have been appointed by each of the Commonwealth and the States as Commissioners, each of the Commonwealth and the States supported our appointments as Counsel Assisting. Yours has been a truly national Royal Commission of Inquiry. A distinction is often drawn between inquisitorial and advisory commissions of inquiry. As I mentioned in my opening to this Royal Commission, your terms of reference do not direct you to seek out wrongdoing or misconduct. When you deployed the compulsory powers conferred on you, you did so in a manner more aptly termed as appreciative. That is, with a view to gathering the best and most useful information available from those with requisite expertise and insights. Some might say, to use a combat agency term, to gain situational awareness. You issued 384 notices to give information and 167 notices to produce documents. In response, you received approximately 30,000 documents comprising some 365,000 pages of material. We acknowledge the work of our instructing solicitors, King and Wood Mallisons, who have driven this mammoth effort. For a time, it appeared that not all those recipients of notices appreciated fully the benefit to be had from positive and constructive engagement with this Royal Commission. However, those concerns soon dissipated. Over time, the support of parties with leave and the general public have assisted you in discharging your letters patent. We extend our particular thanks to those recipients who were, at the time they were complying with your notices, also managing the emergency response to the pandemic. Not all information was acquired through compulsory processes. You received 1,772 public submissions, including 1,339 from individuals, of whom 626 reported being affected directly by the 2019-2020 bushfires, and 433 from organisations. Each submission has been reviewed and summarised. The insights they contain have been valuable contributions to the Commission's work. Certainly, we as Counsel Assisting have benefited from the daily ritual marked by the distribution of the next batch of public submissions, accompanied by the careful review and analysis prepared by the staff of the Office of the Royal Commission. You received 173 detailed responses to the 4 issues papers and 2,026 inquiries to the Commission's inquiry lines. To date, we have tendered 2,972 documents, totalling 67,210 pages over the 4 hearing blocks. We thank the solicitors assisting for their expert assistance in the management of the many public interest and confidentiality claims that necessarily arise in a Royal Commission involving executive government and the Australian Defence Force. We also thank the junior solicitors and law graduates who so patiently and diligently assisted in the prolonged processing of documents for tender. Despite the many inquiries into natural disasters in Australia, the core of your terms of reference have not been traversed before in the same way, focusing on national coordination and national decision-making across all natural disasters. Today marks exactly 4 months since our first substantive hearing. The initial plan for hearings was to hold them across Australia, including in regional communities. Sadly, those early plans were abandoned as the practical realities of the pandemic set in. The breadth of the issues at times felt daunting. Many of the topics, and indeed each of the paragraphs of your terms of reference, might well have been the subject of their own Royal Commission. Yet there has been great benefit to seeking the connections between them and to consider them as a cohesive whole. Many of the institutions which we would be called upon to examine also changed during the course of your inquiry. Chief amongst these was the replacement of COAG and the creation of National Cabinet and the National Federation Reform Council. So too the newly created recovery agencies, including the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, Resilience New South Wales and Victoria's Bushfire Recovery Agency. Several concurrent inquiries released their reports, while the outcomes of other relevant concurrent inquiries are still pending. New initiatives and proposed changes have meant that the existing arrangements in many areas into which you are inquiring are developing or are the subject of additional review. There is the ongoing review of the disaster recovery funding arrangements, the proposed amendments to the Commonwealth's 1903 Defence Act, and the updating of operational protocols and procedures at all levels of government. There is an exposure draft of a data availability and transparency bill. The Fundraising Institute of Australia has proposed a practice note for national disasters and the development of the National Natural Disaster Mental Health Framework. Commissioners, you will recall that yesterday I asked Philip Gaetjens, Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and Head of the Australian Public Service, whether a review was being conducted of the Australian Government Crisis Management Framework. That framework was last updated in December 2017. That question was taken on notice and we received a letter yesterday afternoon from the Commonwealth which indicated that the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet is shortly to reissue an interim updated version 2.3, of the Crisis Management Framework with changes that are largely administrative in nature. And in 2021, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet will undertake a further comprehensive review of the Australian Government Crisis Management Framework with the benefit of receiving the final report of this Royal Commission. That letter will be included in a supplementary tender in Chambers, together with any additional documents identified which we propose in the coming weeks you consider in finalising your report. We embraced the unfamiliar but unexpected efficiency of video conferencing witnesses from remote locations to our purpose-built hearing room here in Canberra. We are grateful for the cooperation of counsel and solicitors for those witnesses and officials and staff who facilitated these interactions and the tireless efforts of the corporate services team here and Law in Order in delivering the first ever national online Royal Commission. The dedicated efforts of the solicitors assisting and the policy team contributed to the successful conduct of over 300 examinations of witnesses in less than 30 full hearing days, an average of 10 witnesses per day. You kindly tolerated the good-natured competition between counsel assisting as to respective daily tallies, as we consistently strove to best assist you, Commissioners, and in the conduct of your inquiry. We examined some of the most senior and experienced current and former officials from the Commonwealth, states and territories, peak industry bodies, charities and civil society. You received expert evidence from Australia's leading scientists and academics. You received evidence from chiefs and commissioners of state and territory fire and emergency services, as well as firefighters and volunteers. Commissioners, we wish also to acknowledge the service of those who fought in the 2019-2020 bushfires and the tragic loss of life. Early in the life of this Commission's work, Ms Dovey of Council, who Commissioners still remains in lockdown in Melbourne, Victoria, she and I were grateful to have the opportunity to travel through the fire-affected communities in southern New South Wales and East Gippsland in Victoria. We were deeply moved by our experience of examining community witnesses in their homes, schools and businesses and seeing up close the devastating impacts of the 2019-2020 bushfires. We sincerely appreciate the bravery of those community witnesses who described traumatic events and shared moments of vulnerability to allow us to have a better understanding of what could be done better. It was probably foreseeable that in a federation, the perspectives we would draw upon to present to you in hearings would be largely state and agency focused, but that was not always so. And some states and territories considered matters from a broader perspective and were willing to fashion a program of change. The evidence exposed there is much thinking and focus on the problems being pursued, but without necessarily looking ahead to possible advances or technological changes, and without necessarily seeing the national picture. That brings me to a further question, which is, where do we see Australia in the next decade and beyond? Will Australia and Australians be better placed than we are today? Commissioners, you may recall seeing the 2004 COAG report, the National Inquiry on Bushfire Mitigation and Management. At the front of the report was set out its vision for an Australia in the year 2020. You may think it instructive to consider that Vision 2020 and whether we will meet the aspirations of the authors of that report. The year 2020 so far, we suggest, has demonstrated the fragile existence we may have in this world. Australians have experienced drought, followed by a summer of bushfires, followed by floods, and then a pandemic. We do not know for sure what the future will hold for all of us. But we do know that we have a need to have a deeper understanding of Australia's risk profile, that stakeholders need to commit to implementing strong and meaningful mitigation and adaptation measures, and to reduce exposure and vulnerability of our communities and people. With those aspirations in mind, there is much to be said for a national approach to and national leadership in respect of natural disasters. Chair, Commissioners, this marks the conclusion of your public hearings, but by no means does it mark the conclusion of the work of this Royal Commission. All of this work will inform and help to shape your observations and recommendations in your final report, with a view to ensuring that the public can have confidence that our natural disaster arrangements will be the best they can be. We thank you, Commissioners, for the continuing opportunity to assist you in this important work.
Thank you, Ms Hogan-Doran. And as you've observed, today marks the Royal Commission's 34th day of public hearings, and our last. We'll now move to focus solely on completing our report, which we'll provide to the Governor-General on the 28th of October 2020. 7 months ago, seems like eons, the Prime Minister announced the creation of the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements. It followed a devastating 2019-2020 bushfire season, but no one could have predicted the significant challenges that lay ahead, not just for our inquiry, but for all Australians and all people around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we all interact with each other, and has changed the way we've had to conduct our inquiry. That alone would have made this Royal Commission somewhat unusual, but coupled with our relatively short reporting time frame, just 252 days, including the extension, this Royal Commission is unique. You alluded to it, but you might say that we've set out to sprint a marathon. As soon as we received our terms of reference, Commissioners and a small group of very dedicated Royal Commission staff moved quickly to establish ourselves. Within 2 weeks of our announcement, we launched our website, opened our public submissions process, and established an information line. And we not only released our schedule for community engagement across Australia, we actually held our first community forums in Adelaide Hills and on Kangaroo Island. Over the few weeks that followed, we held forums and visits in 19 other local government areas. The Commissioners and I have spoken before about how important these early engagement opportunities were for us, and you alluded to it with your visit to Mallacoota. And indeed how grateful we are to those who shared their experiences. Everyone that shared an experience was a unique experience and a unique lens through which we could get a view of what happened in 2019 and 2020. We've heard many deeply personal stories which reinforced to us the importance of this inquiry and underscored the need to hold people at the centre of our inquiry. In fact, many of those stories are still with us here as we sit and think about the last of the hearing days. Unfortunately, we could not reach all the communities we had planned to visit before the health measures associated with the pandemic meant it was no longer possible for the Commission to conduct its work face-to-face without exposing those communities to unnecessary risk. And despite our best efforts, I need to acknowledge we did not manage to make it to Tasmania in the time of the Commission. That does not mean that we have discounted what happened in Tasmania over the period. That being said, we've always been acutely aware of the need to hear from as many affected communities as possible, and the Commission rapidly explored and developed other ways of continuing to engage with the public. Commissioners have engaged with each and every public submission and found them immensely useful in understanding a range of perspectives and experiences. The public submissions also highlighted differences across this large and diverse country and built on the experiences that we shared with the communities when we visited. As required by our terms of reference, this is a national inquiry, as you alluded to. It has required the cooperation and active engagement of jurisdictions throughout the process. And indeed, we've had the benefit of complementary letters patent under the corresponding legislation from each state. And while all parties to the Royal Commission have engaged with us, government agencies have necessarily needed to prioritise the response that they have had to do to the global pandemic. We've worked closely with those parties to make the necessary adjustments and to be as accommodating as possible, while also upholding our commitment to deliver meaningful observations about national disaster arrangements. Having regard to those additional pressures, the Governor-General kindly extended the Royal Commission's reporting date by 2 months to the 28th of October this year. We know that many Australians are still living with the effects and devastation of the 2019-2020 bushfires, and will for some time to come. Understandably, there's also apprehension about the 2020-2021 disaster season that is upon us as we sit here. With this in mind, the Royal Commission published interim observations on the 31st of August, relating to some, but not all, of the issues we expect we will canvass in our report. The Commissioners and I delivered these preliminary observations to share our perspectives as we approach the final stages of our inquiry, and to give governments and emergency response agencies the benefit of our early insight. Now, of course, while our task was framed against the events of Black Summer, we've never limited our focus to just bushfires. Indeed, we engage with a full range of natural disasters, including floods and storms, cyclones, landslides, earthquakes and bushfires. When a Royal Commission is required, it must not just be done, it must be seen to be done. I know I've borrowed those words, but they are very apt. And it's been a phrase on the top of my mind throughout our inquiry, and particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Transparency has always been crucial to us, and I note in particular our work to respond to the new operating environment necessitated by the health measures of COVID-19. This has included establishing this virtual hearing room and broadcasting each and every one of our hearings online, beginning with our online ceremonial hearing on 16 April, right and through until today. Even though the hearings have necessarily been virtual, the Commissioners remain fully aware of the significance of what happened during 2019 and 2020. Indeed, from our offices here, we overlook Aurora Valley as a backdrop in the distance and Mount Tennant, the scene of the devastating ACT fires in February this year. This has helped maintain our perspective on the importance of what we are doing. While there have been a few minor teething issues involved in establishing such a novel process so quickly, I thank the Royal Commission team for their tireless efforts to establish the technical systems and the processes required to make it all work. I thank the witnesses and their legal representatives who have worked with us using these facilities, and the thousands of people who live streamed our inquiry online, including people in other countries such as the United States. It was interesting following those statistics as we went on. As I said on Monday, our thoughts are with our friends on the west coast of the United States who are currently going through a similar experience as we did in the last bushfire season. Though it'll be little comfort to those who've lost loved ones and property in both our countries, I trust the evidence that we have heard and the recommendations in our report will help to learn lessons and implement the changes needed to ensure we are doing a better job in the future, nationally. I cannot conclude our proceedings without thanking my fellow Commissioners, the Honourable Dr Annabelle Bennett, AC, SC, and Professor Andrew McIntosh, who have each discharged their responsibilities under our letters patent with dedication and expertise. I must also note, I think this is the 218th day of the inquiry, and we've not seen the good Commissioner Bennett twice in the same outfit. Professor McIntosh and I haven't shared the same success. A special thanks must also go to our Official Secretary, Miss Anna Harmer, for her significant contribution to the Royal Commission's effective operation. It's easy for the Chair to say when COVID lockdowns come in, hey, that's no problem, we'll just go virtual. But there's a lot that goes on after the Chair says something like that, and she hardly blinked, nodded wisely, then made it all happen. That's just but one of the small challenges that the Commission has faced in moving forward. So Anna, our very special thanks. Appreciate them. As you mentioned, Commissioners and I are especially grateful to you, Ms Hogan-Doran, and the rest of the team. Mr Tokley of Queen's Counsel, along with all the council assisting, Mr Glover, who's not here today, Ms Amber Kapathy, down the back, thank you, Ms Dovey and Ms Spees. We appreciate all your efforts. I know you've worked passionately and skillfully to assist us in every step of the way. And I do note the many days and indeed months Mr Tokley spent away from home with the measures that have been in place. We were, of course, also ably assisted by our solicitors assisting, King and Wood Mallisons, many of whom worked with us remotely. And I thank each and every one of the solicitor team for their dedication to the work and the consistent good humour. I also extend particular thanks to the partners, Emma Costello, Ben Kiley and Emma Lawrence, for their strong leadership throughout the Commission. It takes a lot to keep a remote team going and driving forward, and so right across the legal and solicitors, and we appreciate that very much. For our own Royal Commission staff, which includes our policy and report writing teams, corporate services, engagement, human resources, hearings and logistics, and support staff, they've all worked exceedingly hard over the course of inquiry. And while their efforts are largely unseen, we could not have achieved what we have without each person's contribution. It has been a mammoth team effort to reach this point. And as a chair being appointed to a Royal Commission and sitting back and going, I wonder how you do that. I'll tell you what, having the dedication of the team that I've had and the other commissioners have experienced has been absolutely stellar, really has. Also extend our thanks to the Law and Order team for their extensive I'll correct that for the record, their extensive support delivering our document management services. And, well, that was a Freudian slip. And for facilitating our online hearings so seamlessly. You have Matt at centre stage here, always well dressed and on the camera, got led by Nick down the back and Reggie and Ashim. And it has run seamlessly. We've had the odd issue and occasionally you see a bit of a flurry down the back, but for 35 hearing days it's been absolutely fantastic. And I do need to have a special mention for Elliot Claypole, part of our team, who has made sure that this has been able to come together in the way it has as well. Absolutely magnificent. So on behalf of all the commissioners, I congratulate each and every person who has helped us to get to where we are today, not just in the team, but those that have supported us around Canberra and around the nation. Thank you all for your outstanding contribution to Australia's future. I know you have all participated because you want to make a difference for that future. I'd also like to thank those who have followed our inquiry, the people who have given their time to engage us throughout it, the community forums, written submissions to the Commission, responses to our issues paper, and providing us with photos and videos documenting your personal experiences of the 2019-2020 bushfires through our Bushfire History Project. And I think the latest count, it's just under 2,000 submissions for that as well. Our inquiry would not have enjoyed the benefit of such an extensive volume of information without every individual contribution. The Commissioners, Council Assisting and the Royal Commission staff thank you for the time you've taken to engage with us. We understand that for some of you, revisiting your experiences and contributing to our inquiry was extremely difficult. And we're truly grateful to have benefited from your hindsight and your insight around Australia. Along with my fellow Commissioners and the Office of the Royal Commission, I look forward to delivering our report to the Governor-General on the 28th of October 2020. And with that, Ms Hogan-Doran and Mr Tokley, thank you once again from the bottom of my heart and from those of my fellow Commissioners. We appreciate your dedication and that of all the team. We will now adjourn.
The Royal Commission has adjourned.